From the outside, Sarah and Daniel Mitchell seemed like the kind of couple neighbors admired and secretly envied. Their home stood proudly on a quiet suburban street, its lawn trimmed with geometric precision, the white fence gleaming under the September sun. To passing eyes, it was the perfect portrait of family stability, a young, loving couple expecting their first child. But like many photographs, the image captured only surface beauty, never revealing the cracks hidden underneath. Sarah glowed with pregnancy, her soft dresses stretching gently across her rounded stomach. She smiled often, waved to neighbors, and spoke lovingly about the little boy she and Daniel were expecting. Friends at the local church whispered about how lucky she was. A husband with a solid job, a comfortable home, and a child on the way. What they didn't see was the tension simmering in private, when the house lights dimmed and only silence remained. Daniel, tall and sharply dressed, played his role with practiced ease. He kissed Sarah on the cheek before leaving for work, carried bags of groceries, and stood close to her during doctor's appointments. But his eyes rarely lingered. His affection felt rehearsed, almost mechanical, as though he was following a script he no longer believed in. Sarah noticed, though she rarely spoke of it. A hollow distance had grown between them, subtle at first, then undeniable. At night, while Sarah planned nursery colors and folded tiny clothes with trembling hands, Daniel often stayed late at work. His phone vibrated more than it used to, and he answered it in hushed tones from the other room. When Sarah asked, he would smile tightly and dismiss her fears with the same words. "It's just business. Don't worry yourself." But worry was all she could do. The pregnancy had sharpened her instincts. Every glance, every sigh, every late-night absence seemed to press on her chest like a weight she couldn't lift. She told herself it was hormones, the anxiety of motherhood, but deep down she sensed a storm was gathering. The perfect picture was already beginning to blur. Still, Sarah clung to hope. She wrote in her journal about the life they would build, the laughter of their child filling the hallways, the warmth of family dinners. She tried to ignore the coldness in Daniel's eyes, convincing herself love could be revived, that marriage was built to withstand shadows. But the shadows were thickening, seeping into the corners of their home. One evening, as she waited for him to return, Sarah sat by the window, her hands folded across her belly. The clock ticked past midnight, then 1, then 2. His car finally pulled into the driveway, headlights slicing through the dark. Sarah watched him step out, tie loosened, expression unreadable. When he came inside, he didn't meet her gaze. He kissed her forehead out of habit, not affection, and retreated into the bedroom. That night, Sarah lay awake listening to his breathing. She wanted to believe it was steady and calm, but to her ears it sounded heavy, burdened by secrets. She pressed her hand against her stomach, whispering silently to the child within. "We'll be okay. I promise you we'll be okay." But even as the words left her lips, a hollow ache reminded her she was making promises she couldn't be sure of keeping. The world saw a glowing wife and a doting husband preparing for the happiest chapter of their lives. But inside the Mitchell home, unease curled like smoke, invisible, yet suffocating. The perfect picture was only a frame. Behind the glass, the colors were already darkening. And soon, those shadows would begin to speak. The weeks that followed brought no peace to Sarah. The nursery was almost complete, walls painted soft blue, a crib standing ready, a mobile waiting to spin above her baby's head. Yet every time she entered the room, an uneasiness washed over her, as though the air itself carried a warning. Daniel's absences grew longer, his excuses thinner. Business dinners, late projects, unexpected trips. When Sarah pressed, he brushed her off with a quick smile, the same hollow smile she had come to dread. And though she wanted to believe him, the whispers in her heart grew louder, whispering of betrayal and shadows moving just beyond her reach. Nights became her enemy. Sarah would lie awake, the glow of her phone illuminating her anxious face. She checked his messages when he carelessly left his phone behind, but they were always clean, almost too clean. No wife should feel relief at finding nothing, yet she felt only dread. It was as if the truth had been carefully erased. During her prenatal checkups, Sarah mentioned the fatigue that gnawed at her, the dizziness that sometimes blurred her vision. The doctor ordered blood tests, insisting it was routine. She smiled, reassured, but her nerves tightened. Pregnancy was meant to be tiring, yes, but the unease in her chest was different, sharp, insistent, and growing stronger each day. One night, Sarah heard Daniel on the phone in the kitchen. His voice was low, urgent, almost desperate. She crept halfway down the stairs, holding her breath. "You can't call me this late," he hissed. Silence, then a pause. "I told you. I will handle it. Just trust me." Her heart thundered so loudly she feared he would hear it. She clutched the railing, forcing herself to stay hidden, but every word cut into her like glass. When the call ended, Daniel stood in the dark kitchen for a long moment, his hand pressed against his forehead. He didn't look like a husband returning from work. He looked like a man drowning in secrets. Sarah slipped back upstairs before he noticed, crawling into bed and pretending to sleep. When he finally entered the bedroom, she felt the mattress dip beneath his weight. He lay beside her, but miles of silence stretched between them. Her tears slid into the pillow, unseen. The next morning, she tried to confront him gently. Over breakfast, her hands trembling as she poured coffee, she asked, "Daniel, is there something you're not telling me?" He froze, just for a second, before plastering on his familiar mask. "You're just stressed, Sarah. The baby, the hormones, you're overthinking everything." He kissed her cheek before leaving, the gesture almost cruel in its emptiness. Sarah sat alone at the table, the coffee cooling untouched, her mind racing with unanswered questions. As the days stretched on, her body grew heavier with pregnancy, and her spirit heavier with dread. She wrote in her journal late at night, scribbling questions she couldn't ask out loud. Why do I feel like I'm losing him? Why does it feel like something is eating away at us from the inside? Still, she tried to mask her pain for the world. Smiling at neighbors, joking with her sister over the phone, she carried the weight of secrets she didn't yet understand. But the whispers in the dark had grown too loud to ignore. And when the doctor finally called with her blood test results, Sarah's world would tilt into a nightmare she could never have imagined. The phone call came on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. Sarah had been folding tiny onesies in the nursery, humming softly, trying to distract herself from the gnawing unease she carried like a shadow. The doctor's office had promised results within the day, and her hands shook as she answered the call. "Mrs. Mitchell?" The nurse's voice was careful, almost hesitant. "I have your test results. Could you come in today?" Sarah felt her stomach tighten, not from pregnancy, but from an instinctive knowing that something had gone wrong. She tried to speak, but only a strangled sound escaped. I'll be there." When she arrived, the waiting room seemed unreal, almost cruel in its normality. Families chatted quietly, a child laughed somewhere down the hall, the sun streamed through the windows. Everything looked ordinary. Nothing prepared her for the words that would change her life forever. The doctor led her into a small consultation room, its walls painted a soothing green. He sat opposite her, papers in hand, eyes avoiding hers for just a fraction too long. "Sarah," he began gently, "your test results indicate that you are HIV positive." The word struck her like a thunderclap. For a long moment, the world tilted sideways. The crib, the nursery, the life she imagined for her child, all blurred into a haze of disbelief and fear. She wanted to scream, to cry, to collapse, but her body refused to respond. How is this possible?" she whispered, voice trembling. "I've only been with my husband. I don't understand." The doctor's expression was sympathetic but firm. "We will need further tests to confirm, and we will discuss treatment options immediately. But the results are clear. You must consider your next steps carefully, both for you, your health, and your babies." The words sank in slowly, each one a dagger twisting deeper. Sarah's mind raced. Daniel. Daniel's absences, his secretive phone calls, the unease she had felt growing like a wildfire in her chest. All of it now had a horrifying context. Her husband, the man she trusted with her life and the life of her unborn child, was the source of this unimaginable betrayal. She left the clinic in a daze, the city around her blurred and distorted. The autumn sun, usually comforting, now felt harsh and accusatory. The wind tugged at her coat as she walked, each step heavy with dread. When she reached her car, she sank into the seat, pressing her hands to her face, her mind screaming at her to wake up, to deny the truth, to ignore it all. At home, the nursery looked the same, unchanged, innocent in its quiet brightness. But to Sarah, it had become a chamber of fear. She clutched the small blanket in her hands, feeling the weight of a life she might never protect. Her eyes, once bright with anticipation, now brimmed with tears and suspicion. That evening, she confronted Daniel. The words spilled out of her mouth before she could stop them. "How long?" He froze, expression unreadable, and the silence stretched until it felt unbearable. His lips moved, then paused, then he finally whispered, I didn't mean for this to happen." But the apology felt hollow, insufficient. Sarah could see the truth in his eyes, the deception, the secret life she had suspected but never confirmed. Anger, fear, and heartbreak surged like a tidal wave. The perfect life she had imagined lay in ruins before her. In the days that followed, Sarah tried to make sense of her new reality. Her journal became a lifeline, her confidant as she wrote letters to the baby she carried, letters filled with love and desperation. But even in writing, she could not escape the gnawing truth. Her life, and the life of her unborn child, had been irrevocably changed. Little did she know the unraveling of her marriage would only accelerate as the evidence of Daniel's betrayal began to surface in ways she could never have anticipated. The secrets he had buried so carefully were about to be unearthed. The truth was no longer a distant shadow. It had begun to claw its way into Sarah's life, leaving raw, jagged edges in its path. Every room in the house felt charged with suspicion. The soft blue nursery, once a sanctuary, now seemed to echo with the memory of Daniel's whispered lies. She began noticing details she had previously overlooked: receipts tucked behind drawers, unopened messages on his phone, unfamiliar names scribbled in the margins of his calendar. It started with a single envelope, slightly crumpled, shoved behind the stack of bills on the kitchen counter. Her hands trembled as she opened it, revealing a small slip of paper with a restaurant name she didn't recognize and a series of cryptic dates and times. Panic bubbled up inside her chest, sharp and unrelenting. Her intuition had been right. Daniel had been hiding something from her all along. The next day, she found emails that confirmed her fears. They were short, careful, flirty. One line stood out: "Can't wait to see you again. It has to be soon." The sender's name, Maria, appeared repeatedly. Sarah felt a shiver crawl down her spine. The man she had trusted with her life, the father of her unborn child, had been living a secret life right under her nose. Her heart pounded as she went through more evidence. Hidden in Daniel's laptop were photos of him with Maria, dinners, smiles, embraces, evidence of an intimacy that should have been reserved for her alone. Anger, betrayal, and sorrow collided in her chest. She felt sick to her stomach, unable to reconcile the man she loved with the man depicted in those images. Sarah confronted him that evening, holding the papers and screenshots in her shaking hands. Her voice was tight with emotion. "Who is she, Daniel? Why are you hiding her from me?" Daniel's reaction was calm, almost rehearsed, as if he had expected this confrontation all along. It's complicated, Sarah. You have to understand. It wasn't meant to hurt you. But the words fell flat, hollow against the mountain of evidence she now held. She wanted him to deny it, to explain it away, to make it go away. But he didn't. The betrayal was undeniable. Over the following days, Sarah's home became a place of quiet vigilance. She observed Daniel's movements with a new intensity, noting the subtle shifts in his behavior. A hurried glance at his phone, a hesitation before answering her questions, a sudden defensiveness when she mentioned work or friends. The man she had thought she knew had transformed into a stranger, a ghost haunting their shared spaces. Evenings were the worst. She would sit alone in the nursery, rocking a chair that would never cradle her child in her arms, staring at the tiny clothes she had folded with hope and anticipation. Her anger was a living thing now, coiling around her heart, driving her to uncover every secret he had buried. And then there were the messages that suggested the affair wasn't just casual, it was intense, consuming, and dangerous. Daniel had woven Maria into his life, threading her presence through his actions in ways Sarah was only beginning to comprehend. The more she uncovered, the more she realized that she was not just a victim of infidelity. She had been deliberately deceived, infected, and left vulnerable. By the end of the week, the pattern was clear. Every secret, every lie, every hidden meeting and message pointed to a single, undeniable conclusion. Daniel's betrayal went far deeper than she had imagined. Maria wasn't just an affair. She was a shadow entwined with his life, a presence that threatened to engulf them all. Sarah's mind raced, turning over every interaction, every whispered excuse. She understood now that this was only the beginning. Maria's presence loomed like a storm on the horizon, and soon the full weight of Daniel's deception would demand confrontation. The house that once felt safe now seemed like a cage, its walls closing in with the truth. Maria had always been an enigma, a presence that Daniel tried to hide but never fully erased from his life. In her small apartment downtown, she stared at her phone with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Every message from Daniel was a lifeline, every missed call a dagger twisting deeper into her chest. She knew Sarah existed, knew she was pregnant, knew she should feel guilt, but Maria felt only possessiveness. The unborn child was another obstacle, another symbol of the life she coveted but could never truly share. Her apartment smelled faintly of coffee and candle wax, the blinds half closed, casting shadows across the room like fingers reaching for her. Maria replayed every interaction with Daniel in her mind, memorizing his gestures, the curve of his smile, the sound of his voice. Each memory fueled her belief that they belonged together, that Sarah's presence was an interruption to a destiny already written. Maria's obsession was calculated, methodical. She documented Daniel's routine, memorized the streets he drove, and kept careful notes on every moment Sarah appeared to suspect him. Every whisper of doubt from Sarah was another challenge, another chance for Maria to tighten her grip. She convinced herself she was justified. After all, Daniel had chosen her too, in secret. When she called him that night, her voice was both soft and commanding. "You need to end it before she ruins everything. You promised me, Daniel." There was a pause on the line, long enough to make her pulse quicken. Daniel's reply was hesitant, strained, almost human, but that hesitation fueled Maria's anxiety. She pressed on, weaving threats beneath her words, making him feel the weight of her expectations, the danger of disappointing her. Maria had not always been like this. Friends remembered her as lively, ambitious, even charming, but they never saw the shadows beneath her surface. Beneath the confident exterior lurked a hunger that could not be sated, a need to control, to dominate, and Daniel had become the instrument of that hunger, unwittingly trapped in her orbit. She imagined confronting Sarah herself, picturing the scene in her mind 1,000 times, the look of horror, the tremble of hands, the disbelief in her eyes. Maria smiled at the thought. She told herself it wasn't cruel. It was necessary. Sarah represented the life Maria wanted, the family she believed she deserved. In her mind, eliminating obstacles was merely the rational course of action. At night, she would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, imagining scenarios where Daniel abandoned Sarah completely, where the baby never existed, where the three of them could finally exist in a world tailored to her desires. The fantasies were vivid, almost cinematic, and yet they carried a sinister edge. Maria understood that desire alone would not be enough. Action was required, and Daniel's weakness made him a willing accomplice. As the days passed, Maria's presence became a looming force, invisible yet inescapable. Every call, every text, every clandestine meeting she orchestrated tightened the web around Daniel. Sarah's suspicion, once vague and haunting, was now confirmed in Maria's mind. The perfect life Sarah imagined was fragile, and Maria held the power to fracture it completely. By the end of the week, Maria felt unstoppable. She did not see herself as malicious, only necessary, an inevitable shadow crossing the lives of those she deemed obstacles. And soon, the inevitable confrontation with Sarah would occur, a meeting that Maria believed would solidify her hold over Daniel forever. The storm was coming, and Maria would be at its center. The stage was set for a collision that would irreversibly change every life involved. Sarah didn't plan to see Maria that afternoon. The meeting was accidental, orchestrated by fate rather than intention. Yet when she arrived at the coffee shop to retrieve groceries she had left behind, Maria was already there, leaning casually against the counter, phone in hand, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on Sarah. The air shifted instantly, thick with tension. Maria's smile was casual, but it didn't reach her eyes. Sarah's chest tightened. The fury she had carried silently for weeks surged to the surface. She felt the weight of her unborn child pressing against her heart, a reminder of the stakes, a reminder that she could not allow fear or indecision to control her. Maria approached with deliberate steps, each one measured, confident. "Sarah," she said, voice soft but edged with calculation, "we need to talk." Sarah's fingers clenched around her shopping bag. The words came out before she could stop them. "You've already taken everything from me. How long were you planning to hide it?" Maria tilted her head, feigning innocence, but her eyes glinted with something sharper. Possession. Entitlement. "Hide what?" "I think you're overreacting. Daniel and I... It's complicated." Sarah's laugh was bitter, hollow. "Complicated? You call betraying a pregnant woman complicated? You call infecting her complicated?" Maria's expression hardened. For the first time, a shadow of fear, or perhaps calculation, crossed her face. "Don't make this about me alone. He chose you too, Sarah. Don't pretend he's innocent." The words landed like stones in Sarah's chest. She had known Daniel's complicity, but hearing it spoken aloud by the woman he had hidden behind closed doors made the reality unbearable. Her knees threatened to buckle, but she straightened, voice trembling with controlled rage. "You think you can manipulate him, control him, use him? You're wrong. I will expose everything. I will make sure the world knows what you've done." Maria leaned closer, voice a whisper now, almost intimate. "Go ahead. Threaten me. I don't care. But remember, he's mine too. Don't underestimate what people will do when they're cornered." The words were both warning and promise. Sarah's fists clenched tighter, nails digging into her palms, as she realized the danger she faced was not only from Daniel's betrayal, but from this woman's relentless obsession. Maria was not just a lover, she was a predator, and Sarah's life and the life of her unborn child hung in a precarious balance. Around them, the coffee shop hummed with oblivious chatter, the ordinary world continuing as if it knew nothing of the storm about to erupt. Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper, trembling but steady. "I won't let you destroy us." Maria's smile returned, cold and calculated. "We'll see about that." The encounter ended abruptly, with Maria leaving as quietly as she had appeared, leaving behind a tangible residue of tension that clung to every surface. Sarah remained seated, shaking, trying to steady her breathing, knowing that nothing could erase the collision she had just survived. Back at home, every choice felt like a mistake, every word a lie. Daniel's hands shook as he picked up his phone, the temptation to call Maria, her voice soft, insistent, commanding, fighting with the guilt that Sarah's words had imprinted into his conscience. He wanted to fix everything, but he knew some damage could never be undone. Maria's texts flashed across the screen, each one escalating in intensity. It has to end. Do it before she destroys everything. You promised me. Her words were both threat and instruction, and he realized with a sinking dread that she expected action, not words. The calm, measured control he had once wielded over his life had vanished. Panic surged like wildfire through his veins. Meanwhile, Sarah moved through the house with quiet vigilance. She monitored Daniel's movements, cataloged inconsistencies, and prepared herself for every possible deception. Her anger was tempered with fear, the fear for her unborn child, for her own survival, and for the man she had once loved. She knew the next days would determine the course of their lives, and every second of hesitation could have irreversible consequences. Daniel tried reasoning with himself, recalling moments of affection, flashes of love that had once seemed eternal. He thought of the nursery, the blue walls, the tiny clothes folded neatly, waiting for a child who would never know innocence. His chest tightened, but Maria's voice echoed relentlessly, twisting his thoughts, pushing him toward decisions he wasn't fully capable of facing with clarity. The pressure became unbearable. Sleep eluded him, replaced by visions of confrontation, of Sarah discovering everything, of Maria's threat materializing in ways he could not control. He paced the room, mind racing, until the line between right and wrong blurred into a haze of fear and desperation. By the end of the week, Daniel's composure had crumbled entirely. His interactions with Sarah were strained, defensive, laced with a growing volatility that both terrified and angered her. She could sense the shift, the quiet before a storm, the tipping point that would decide the trajectory of all their lives. In the shadows, Maria continued her quiet manipulations, ensuring Daniel remained isolated, trapped in her web. Her presence was invisible, yet palpable, a constant pressure that left Daniel teetering on the edge of sanity. The next encounter would not be verbal. It would be decisive, irreversible, and terrifying in its finality. Sarah, unaware of the specifics but feeling the weight of impending danger, braced herself. The pieces of betrayal and obsession were aligning, moving toward a moment that would redefine everything. She could sense it in the tension in the air, in Daniel's nervous avoidance, in the way the house itself seemed to hold its breath. The breaking point had arrived, and nothing would remain the same. The storm that had been building quietly, invisibly, was poised to strike, and when it did, the silence would be filled with consequences no one could escape. The night air hung heavy over the Mitchell home, thick with tension and foreboding. Inside, the quiet was unnatural, almost expectant, as if the house itself sensed the storm about to erupt. Sarah had been pacing the nursery again, clutching her journal and glancing nervously at the door, the weight of her unborn child pressing against her chest. Every creak of the floorboards made her flinch. Every shadow on the walls seemed alive with threat. Daniel moved through the dimly lit hallway, his thoughts chaotic, his breathing shallow. The confrontation with Sarah and the ultimatum from Maria had pushed him to the edge of decisions that could not be undone. In his mind, a collision of desperation, fear, and obsession merged into one dark, unrelenting force. The clock ticked on, each second heavy with impending consequence. Maria's voice echoed in his memory, insistent and relentless. It has to end before she destroys everything. You promised me. Her words were no longer distant. They had taken root, a malignant force shaping his every choice. Daniel's hands shook as he fumbled with the keys to the cabinet, the knife he had hidden for weeks now feeling like the only solution to the chaos that consumed him. Sarah sensed something was wrong. She had learned to read the subtleties, the tension in his shoulders, the unnatural stillness of his movements. She tried to steady her breathing, convincing herself that she could reason with him, that love could still exist even amidst betrayal. But instinct screamed a different truth. Danger was imminent, and no words could diffuse it. It began with a sudden movement, a shadow across the doorway. Sarah turned, eyes wide as Daniel advanced. Panic surged through her veins, sharp and electrifying. She stumbled backward, knocking over the small chair she had been sitting on, the crash echoing through the silent house. "Daniel, please, don't!" she cried, voice cracking. His expression was unreadable, a mix of fear, fury, and detachment. In the blur of motion, the knife glinted in the dim light, a metallic promise of irreversible action. Sarah tried to defend herself, pushing him away, but his strength, driven by panic and obsession, overpowered her. The sound of the struggle was muted, carried only by the thick walls. Furniture toppled, the chair fell again, a vase shattered across the floor. Sarah's cries were muffled by the suffocating darkness, her body trembling as she fought to protect both herself and the life inside her. Then, silence. The air seemed to still, heavy and oppressive, broken only by the shallow, labored breaths of the two bodies on the floor. Sarah's small, terrified movements had ceased, replaced by the stillness of something final. Daniel sank to his knees, eyes wide, staring at the consequences of his actions. Panic gave way to a hollow realization. There was no undoing what had happened. In the quiet aftermath, the house seemed to mourn with her. The soft blue walls of the nursery, once a symbol of hope, were now a cruel reminder of innocence lost. The tiny clothes, folded neatly in drawers, remained untouched, as if awaiting a child who would never wear them. Blood stained the floor, a dark testament to betrayal, obsession, and desperation. Daniel remained on the ground, hands trembling, mind reeling. Outside, the night continued without interruption, indifferent to the tragedy that had unfolded within the walls of a home that had promised safety and love. The world had moved on, unaware that within its heart, darkness had triumphed. By morning, the silence would be shattered not by cries, but by discovery. The neighbors would notice, the police would arrive, and the careful facade of control that Daniel had clung to would collapse. The web of lies, obsession, and betrayal had reached its devastating conclusion. And yet, the story was far from over. The aftermath of this night, the investigation, the unraveling of lies, the desperate attempts at concealment, would reveal more horrors, more manipulations, and more truths that no one involved could escape. The blood had been spilled, but the consequences were only beginning to ripple outward. Daniel's hands shook as he surveyed the room, the metallic scent of blood still heavy in the air. He glanced at the crumpled forms of Sarah and the unborn child, and a wave of nausea swept over him. Yet even in that moment of horror, his mind raced, calculating, plotting. He could not let the authorities see the truth, could not allow the world to unravel the fragile control he had once maintained. Maria moved beside him, calm in a way that chilled him. She had arrived shortly after the act, her presence precise, deliberate. Where Daniel was panic incarnate, Maria was strategic, a predator assessing the scene. "We need to make it look clean," she whispered, her voice low but firm. "No mistakes. If anyone suspects us, it's over." Daniel nodded numbly, following her lead as she directed him to rearrange furniture, wipe fingerprints, and adjust the placement of objects in the nursery. Every motion felt surreal, like he was watching someone else commit the acts and stage the aftermath. The house, once a place of safety, had become a theater of deception, and they were both actors in a play with irreversible consequences. They moved the bodies to create the illusion of a struggle gone wrong, altering the scene just enough to suggest a robbery or an accident. Blood smears were minimized, items displaced strategically, and the nursery transformed from a chamber of life to a carefully controlled tableau of tragedy. Daniel's stomach churned with each adjustment, each small lie he planted over the truth of his actions. Maria was meticulous, instructing him on how to explain their evening if questioned by police. Tell them you came home to find her like this. Emphasize the shock, the panic. Make it about reaction, not responsibility. Her cold efficiency contrasted sharply with Daniel's faltering composure. He kept glancing at the nursery, at the tiny clothes folded neatly in drawers, the soft blue walls now tainted by horror. Every thought of innocence lost pressed on him, yet Maria's voice cut through, guiding his fear into calculated deception. The next morning, they staged a scene outside the home as well. Daniel called 911, his voice tight but convincingly distraught. Maria stayed behind, silently observing, her eyes cold and calculating. The neighbors arrived quickly, drawn by the reported screams, and Daniel played the grieving husband, his posture slumped, his expressions carefully controlled. Detectives arrived, surveying the scene with professional detachment, but keen eyes missed nothing. Daniel answered questions, rehearsed statements, and feigned confusion, yet subtle inconsistencies began to emerge. He felt the pressure mounting, a slow squeeze around his chest. Every breath, every word was a test, and one mistake could unravel everything. Maria whispered reminders, ensuring he didn't falter, but Daniel felt the weight of guilt pressing down with increasing intensity. The house was no longer just a home. It was a trap, a prison of deceit and murder. The careful plan of concealment, meticulous as it was, could not erase the truth embedded in the room, the violence, the betrayal, the finality of death. Even as the detectives left with preliminary questions, Daniel and Maria understood that their control was fragile. Every look exchanged between them carried silent tension. Neither could trust the other completely, for the secret they shared was lethal, binding, and potentially explosive. The cover-up had begun, but the web of lies could not hold indefinitely. Soon, inconsistencies, digital traces, and forensic evidence would rise to the surface, demanding answers. And when they did, the carefully constructed facade of innocence would crumble, revealing the full scope of deceit, obsession, and destruction that had led to this night. The game of appearances had started, but the reckoning was inevitable. Shadows of truth loomed, waiting to expose what no amount of staging or rehearsed grief could hide. The investigation moved quickly once the detectives arrived. The Mitchell home, carefully staged to suggest an unfortunate accident, revealed inconsistencies that no amount of planning could disguise. Blood patterns contradicted the story, fingerprints lingered in unexpected places, and small details, the slight tilt of furniture, the smudge on the phone screen, betrayed the careful narrative Daniel and Maria had attempted to construct. Detective Reynolds, a seasoned investigator with an eye for subtle deception, examined the scene with meticulous care. "Nothing about this adds up," he muttered, crouching by the nursery floor. "This wasn't an accident." Sarah's death had sparked outrage in the community, and the detectives felt the urgency of justice pressing down on them. Forensic analysis began to paint a vivid, horrifying picture. Daniel's and Maria's fingerprints were everywhere they shouldn't have been. Surveillance footage from nearby streets revealed unfamiliar comings and goings, matching times that contradicted Daniel's story. Every small lie he had told had left a trail, and detectives followed it like a hunter tracking prey. When Daniel and Maria were finally brought in for questioning, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Each sat in separate rooms, the stark fluorescent lights exposing every tremor of guilt, every flicker of fear. Daniel's eyes darted nervously, aware that the web of evidence was closing around him. Maria, calm but calculated, met the questions with measured answers, trying to maintain control. "Where were you between 9 and 11 last night?" Detective Reynolds asked Daniel, voice firm. I was home. I checked on Sarah. I found her and called 911, he stammered, words halting, eyes darting. The detective leaned closer, voice low and unyielding. Do you realize how many inconsistencies exist in your statement? How many pieces of evidence point directly to you? Daniel swallowed hard. He wanted to plead, to explain, but the weight of truth pressed down too heavily. He could feel Maria's presence even in the separate rooms, the shadow of her manipulation pressing him to remain silent, to share the blame subtly. Maria's interrogation revealed a different dynamic. She spoke calmly, almost too calmly, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. Daniel made his choices. I didn't force anything, she said smoothly. Her words only strengthened the detective's suspicions. The truth was layered, tangled, and chilling. Each revelation brought them closer to understanding the depth of betrayal, obsession, and premeditation that had led to Sarah's death. The affair, the lies, and the manipulation were no longer secrets. They were evidence, irretrievable and damning. As the interrogation progressed, Daniel's composure fractured. Confessions began to slip, half-truths, admissions of deception, acknowledgments of his role in the sequence of events that had led to murder. Maria, though still composed, could not completely shield herself. The pattern of messages, meetings, and interactions was undeniable. By the end of the day, the detectives had pieced together a mosaic of deceit. Sarah's murder had been orchestrated through layers of obsession and manipulation, a deadly convergence of Daniel's desperation and Maria's relentless pursuit. The justice system now held the fragments of truth in its hands, preparing to confront both perpetrators with the full weight of their actions. Outside, the sun dipped behind the city skyline, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps. Justice was coming, but it was cold and methodical, unyielding and exacting. For Daniel and Maria, the consequences were imminent. The law would see them as they truly were, betrayers, manipulators, murderers. Yet even as arrests were made and charges filed, the shadow of loss lingered. Sarah's voice, her unborn child, and the lives torn apart by betrayal could never be restored. The investigation revealed the facts, the motives, and the horrors, but it could not heal the void left behind. Justice was underway, but its clarity offered no solace to the lives shattered in its wake. The final reckoning was near. The courtroom would bear witness to the unraveling of obsession, betrayal, and murder, but the consequences of their actions would resonate far beyond the walls of the courthouse. The courthouse loomed like a silent sentinel over the city, its stone steps bathed in the pale morning sun. Inside, the air was heavy with anticipation, the hushed murmurs of spectators mixing with the distant scrape of chairs and shuffle of papers. For Daniel and Maria, the trial was no longer hypothetical. It was the final stage, a public reckoning for every lie, betrayal, and crime they had committed. The prosecution presented a meticulously constructed case. Forensic evidence, digital correspondence, and witness statements all painted a damning portrait. Daniel's guilt was undeniable. His complicity in Sarah's murder documented in painstaking detail. Maria's involvement, though more insidious, was equally clear. Her obsession and manipulations had directly influenced the fatal chain of events. During the trial, Sarah's friends and family recounted the woman she had been. Hopeful, loving, and betrayed. Their voices trembled with grief as they spoke of the nursery that would never hold a child, the laughter that would never echo through the walls of the Mitchell home, the life cut short before it could even begin. The courtroom was silent, the weight of loss pressing down on every person present. Daniel's attempts to explain himself fell flat. He described his panic, his fear, his manipulation by Maria, but the jury saw the cracks in his story. Each word, each hesitation only reinforced the evidence against him. He had been a husband, a protector, a father-to-be, and he had failed in every role. The courtroom watched as the illusion of the perfect picture shattered under the harsh light of truth. Maria's defense was equally futile. She presented herself as secondary, as someone swept along by circumstances beyond her control, but the meticulous record of her planning and influence betrayed her story. The letters, the calls, the orchestrated meetings all revealed a deliberate, calculated interference that had left 2 innocent lives in ruins. Her calm demeanor could not mask the moral weight of her actions. The jury deliberated for hours, the tension in the courthouse almost tangible. When the verdict was finally read, the words hung in the air like a hammer striking stone. Guilty on all counts. Daniel and Maria would face the consequences of their actions, sentenced for their roles in the murders. Justice had been delivered, but it was cold, precise, and unyielding. Outside the courtroom, the world carried on, oblivious to the lives destroyed within its walls. The Mitchell home remained silent and empty, a monument to tragedy and betrayal. Neighbors whispered, friends mourned, and the story of Sarah's life and death spread quietly through the community. Justice had been served, but the healing that followed was slow, uneven, and incomplete. For the investigators, the trial marked closure of sorts. Detective Reynolds reflected on the meticulous work that had uncovered the truth, the painstaking evidence that had ensured justice. Yet even he knew that no amount of forensic skill could restore what had been lost. The life of a pregnant woman, the potential of a child, the innocence destroyed by obsession and betrayal. In private, Daniel and Maria faced their sentences with different reactions. Daniel, haunted by guilt and remorse, stared into the void of his cell, replaying the choices that led to this moment. He understood finally the irreversibility of his actions, the impossibility of redemption for the lives he had destroyed. Maria, however, remained composed, her mind still calculating, still observing the world outside her confinement, her obsession now redirected inward. The story concluded not with closure, but with the lingering presence of loss. Sarah's voice, her dreams, and the life of her unborn child could never be reclaimed. The courtroom had pronounced justice, yet the emotional toll, the grief, the betrayal, the absence, remained unresolved. Justice had been served, but there was no redemption, no solace, no restoration of what had been destroyed. Only the cold, unyielding truth remained. 2 lives lost, 1 unrelenting perpetrator, and the haunting echo of choices that could never be undone. And as the sun set over the city, shadows lengthened across the courthouse steps, a silent reminder that justice, though delivered, could never heal the wounds left behind.